Greetings! In this video, I'll be painting an Intercessor Sergeant from the 6th Company of the Eagle Warriors chapter. This chapter was requested by one of you guys. If you have any suggestions for chapters, let me know in the comments and I'll add them to the list. I built this model using an Infernus Marine body, with some spare arms from other kits. The pauldron with the chapter armorial has been 3D printed. Some information about that is in the video description. I've primed the model black, then undercoated it with grey cere using my airbrush. If you're wanting to follow along, you can use Citadel's grey cere spray primer if you prefer. Now onto the paint job itself, starting with Ulthorn Grey. The Eagle Warriors scheme is parted by pale, with Dexter blue and Sinister white. In non-heraldic terms, that means there's a vertical division with blue on the Marine's right, with white on the other side. Now for the blue, using Macragge blue. I painted a rough line down the middle, which I'll clean up later. The Eagle Warriors have multiple shades of blue in their references, but I used the most recent one that I could find in the 8th edition Codex, which matches the Ultramarines blue, so I went with that. I also painted in the chapter armorial at this stage. Next I used Abaddon black to paint in the undersuit bits, trying not to get it on the white, but knowing that I could always paint over it with some battle damage if I did. Now for the leather, starting with Rhinox hide. This was applied in 2 coats over the holster, pouches and sling as a simple base coat. Next I used Skrag brown to do an edge highlight, and to paint in some damage effects along the edges and most importantly on the bland flat surfaces. I've started using the edge of the brush for this too, as it seems to make some nice patterns. A final highlight was done with Deathclaw brown, focusing on the larger sections of Skrag brown to add some more depth to those bits, and to pick out any sharp edges that I felt needed more attention. We're onto the Purity Seal now, which we'll go through quickly. I used a base coat of Zandri dust all over the parchment, followed by a highlight of Ushabti bone over the edges and most areas that I didn't consider to be in shade. Then Screaming Skull over the most prominent edges and to add some additional texture. For the wax, I started with a base coat of Screamer Pink, followed by an edge highlight of Pink Horror. Now onto the red bits, namely the helmet, which denotes this Marine as a Sergeant, and the bolt carbine casing like the reference shows. Just a simple base coat like the other bits. To highlight, I used Evil Sunz Scarlet, applied along the edges of the surfaces and to add some scratches for the first pass of battle damage. I also used this to paint in some of the wrist lights in preparation for later. Going back to the helmet, I used Warpstone Glow for the eye lenses and 2 of the wrist lights. It takes 2 coats for this to cover the red. To highlight, I used Moot Green, painting in a smaller section than before to brighten up the area. A final highlight was done with Dorn Yellow, in an even smaller bit. Now, moving back to the other wrist lights, I used Wild Rider red and Lugganath orange, in the same method I used for the green lights. I forgot to paint in these cables, so I went back to Mephiston red to base coat them, and then I used Evil Sunz Scarlet to highlight them. Onto the metallics now, starting with Retributor armour for the Imperialis on the plastron. I think the gold stands out nicely against the rest of the scheme. Next, I used some gunmetal grey to paint in the silver bits. This included the gun chassis, the barrel details, power pack exhausts, helmet details, and especially the iron skull on the helmet. Until this point, I wasn't sure which company to go for. I decided 6th Company, so I used some Trollslayer orange over the knee pad to indicate that. For Codex compliant chapters, the 6th Company is a reserve battle line company, comprised mostly of battle line units like Intercessors, so this one works out well for a change. Continuing with the markings, I prepared for decals using a gloss varnish, then applied a battle line tactical marking with a high Gothic numeral depicting 3rd Squad, some white text to flesh out the pauldron some more, and a Tyrannic War veteran marking on the fold. Maybe this guy was sent to reinforce a sector during the height of Leviathan's advance or something. Now back to highlighting, switching over to Runefang steel for the silver details. This was applied all over the raised surfaces and any visible edges that I felt needed emphasising. The rivets dotting the model were painted with this as well. Finally, to highlight the blue armour, I used Calgar blue. A standard edge highlight was applied, as well as some light scratches and scuff marks to help weathering later on. Now for highlighting the white armour, using Corax white. I applied this in the same way as I did the Calgar blue, edge highlighting and applying some scratches to use as guides for later. Now for the heavy weathering passes, starting with Rhinox hide. Little dots and lines were used to mimic chips and scratches, for both the white armour and the blue armour, as well as for the red helmet and the weapon casing. I also painted in little scribbles on the purity seal, but I didn't seem to recall that bit. Finally, we're now onto the enamel wash, using AK Interactive's Sepia Paneliner. This was generously applied all over the model, only avoiding the 3D printed armorial so as not to force a dark edge around it. After I was happy with the enamel, I waited a few hours before applying my usual basing method, painting the base rim black, then sealing everything in with some ultramatte varnish. And here we have it! An Intercessor Sergeant from the Eagle Warriors 6th Company. I'm very pleased with how this one came out. The vertical split scheme is very fun to paint, though I'd imagine it'd get very tiresome if you were doing an army of these guys. Having seen the finished model, I do wonder how I could have done the red helmet differently. It seems very flat, despite receiving highlights and weathering like the other bits. Perhaps I needed to go even brighter with the highlights, or do much darker shadows, or maybe even move the tone towards orange, I'm not sure. Speaking of orange, the choice to go for 6th Company was interesting. I didn't want to do yellow for 2nd, as gold and yellow can look weird next to each other. I didn't want to go for red for 3rd Company, as I thought there'd be enough red already. I also wanted to deviate from the colour plate references, so I didn't use green or black, for 4th and 5th Companies respectively. So I could really only go for 6th or 7th Company with orange or purple. If I were painting an army of these guys, I'd go for whatever made sense for whatever unit I was doing, but as this is a one-off, I wanted it to stand out a bit more, so yeah, I'm not sure. I'm probably overthinking it. But anyway, that's all I've got for this one. Hope you stick around for the next one.